Welcome to Who Shaves the Barber, a weekly podcast where we explore paradoxes, thought experiments, and other pointless problems. I'm William Nava. Today's topic is certainty. Before I start on this topic, just a quick kind of disclaimer. I really want to encourage anybody listening or watching to let me know what your objections are, what your comments are. I am not, never have claimed to be an expert on any of these topics. What I'm about to talk about today is not something I'm an expert on. And so while I have some strong intuitions on it and I've read my share on this topic, I'm not actually certain about the things I'm going to be saying today. So I'd really just love to hear your thoughts and particularly your objections so that I can refine some of these ideas. So like I said, today's topic is certainty, and particularly my claim that it is impossible for us to be 100% certain about anything. So first of all, just to clarify, I'm talking about a philosophical level of certainty, right? So in everyday life, we have situations where maybe you say, hey, what time did you go to the store? Oh, I went at 2. Are you certain of that? Yes, I am. I looked at the watch and it said 2 o'clock. Yes, I am certain. Okay, are you 100% certain there's no possibility whatsoever that your watch was off, that this or that? And, you might think, okay, maybe there's like a sliver, right? So in terms of the everyday use concept of certainty, sure, there is that kind of certainty. I'm talking about a philosophical kind of certainty, which is 100% certainty, right? And I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by that. But that is what I'm arguing against, the idea that there's any claim that we can be justified in saying that we are 100% philosophically certain about. Let me, again, be clear about something else. I'm not saying that we can't know anything. I'm not arguing for skepticism. I'm arguing for fallibilism, right? I'm saying, yes, we can know things, but none of those things that we can know can we know with actual certainty. So essentially, that means that I'm drawing up a distinction, right? So there is knowledge in general, which is just knowledge. Okay, and then there's a subset of knowledge, which is certain knowledge, right? 100% certain knowledge. I'm saying that subset is empty. There is no such thing, right? But general knowledge does exist. That is something that is not something that I'm arguing against, at least right now. So now let me say what is certain knowledge. Let me sort of pin that down so I can be clear about what it is that I'm arguing against. Knowledge in general is typically analyzed as justified true belief, right? So you can say that you know a claim if that claim actually is true, if you believe that claim to be true, and you actually have some justification, some reasonable reasons for thinking that is true. Now, there are these famous Gettier problems that show that sometimes you can have justified true belief and still not know something. But that's actually not really relevant here. The point is justified true belief is definitely a prerequisite for knowing something. So certain knowledge is a special kind of justified true belief. It's a kind of justified true belief where the justification has a huge burden on it. It has to be a justified true belief where part of the justification is that you're actually justified not only in believing this, but in believing that it is metaphysically or logically impossible for you to be wrong about this belief. Okay, so one level of justification is just, I have very, very good reasons for, being quite certain that this thing is true. I say quite certain, and that's not an everyday sense, right? But another thing entirely is I have infallible reasons for thinking that my belief actually cannot logically or metaphysically be wrong. So obviously, way bigger burden on that justification. That's the distinction. That's what that certainty is. And my general claim is going to be that there is no such thing. That there is no justification that strong. That no justification actually meets that requirement of justifying us in thinking that it is impossible for us to be wrong. Now that I've drawn up this distinction between certain knowledge and just knowledge generally, you might ask, okay, so what does general knowledge that isn't certain look like, right? If being 100% certain is the special class of knowledge that actually there is no version of, but I'm saying there is knowledge, so what level of credence do you have to have, or like certainty do you have to have, degree of certainty do you have to have in order for something to count just as knowledge? I would say that matter is clearly vague, right? So, look, if you're 99% sure of something, and that thing is actually true, and you have and you have justifications, then you know it. If you're 50% sure of something, then that doesn't count as knowledge. That's just belief. So, where exactly are the boundaries? Where, what's the percentage level where you go from just belief to knowledge? That's a vague question. I'm guessing no actual line exact point where that switches, but it's that, there's a huge philosophical problem about vagueness and the way in which it applies to knowledge as I'm describing it, right? Knowledge that is less than 100%, but is still knowledge. The way it applies to this is not particularly special, right? So the vagueness problem plagues pretty much everything. So when I say the vagueness problem, I'm talking specifically about the sorites paradox. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I have an interview with Graham Priest. I'll put a link to it, but that's what I'm referring to. It's a problem that plagues pretty much everything. And so, the fact that it's a problem for this description of knowledge that I'm giving shouldn't really count against it, because otherwise, that's a point against literally pretty much every theory that you could possibly have. So that's knowledge as without certainty. A quick point to make, because whenever I've made this claim to people that that there's nothing I can be certain of, there's nothing that we can be certain of, I always get the same response. Are you certain of that? So no, I'm not. Okay. When I say that there is nothing we can be 100% certain of, that claim, there's nothing we can be 100% certain of, falls under that, right? That's a universal claim about all beliefs that we can have. And so, yes, that one will fall under it as well. I am not 100% certain of the fact that there is nothing I can be 100% certain of. Now, you might think that that's a problem. But first of all, again, I do believe that I'm not, that I don't have 100% certainty of anything. So I believe that. I believe that strongly enough that I think it probably counts as knowledge, but I don't think it counts as certain knowledge. So there's no kind of internal contradiction there or anything. You might say, though, that since I'm saying that I'm not certain of the fact that I'm saying I believe that I'm not certain of anything, but I'm not certain of that, then I must be leaving open the possibility that I actually am certain about something, even though I don't believe I'm certain of anything. And yes, that actually follows, and that is true, right? I have to, given everything I've just said, I have to admit that it's possible, however unlikely, there is a realm of possibility that there is something that I am actually 100% certain of, even though I believe that I am not 100% certain of anything. That's pretty weird. That's unusual. However, again, that's only a possibility. It's not actually something I believe is true. It's merely a possibility. And while it may seem like a fairly, counterintuitive or unusual thing to be possible, I think given all the arguments that I'm about to give for why we can't be certain of anything, I think, if you buy the arguments I'm going to give you, then you'll see that there's nothing surprising about this falling within the realm of possibility, however unlikely it may be. So now this is so far has been more or less preliminary, clarifying the view that I'm going to defend. I'm going to now give some arguments in defense of it. And I want to say that, again, the point is to argue against 100% certainty, right? So some of the claims, probably most of the claims I'm going to make, maybe you could find a way out of, maybe you could find some solutions to. My claim is not that every argument I'm about to give is a knockdown argument. My overall claim is that, taken cumulatively, all of the arguments I'm about to give, if you take them as a group, they are cumulatively enough to introduce a sliver of doubt into any claim that you might believe. Okay? So I'm not claiming to disprove your knowledge in any or all things. It's merely that taken together as a whole, everything I'm about to say will show that we should have at least a sliver of doubt about any belief that we have. Okay, now let me get to some of the arguments, and I'll start with some kind of general arguments. Here's the first one. Given the definition that I gave of certainty, in order to be 100% certain of something, we need to have that justified true belief in it, right? And we need to believe that we're justified in being 100% certain of it. Okay? So, let's say I have a belief and I feel sure of it. I need to also have an extra belief, which is that sense of justification I have in that first belief is I am justified in thinking that is 100% bulletproof. Nothing could get through it. Okay, so as you'll see, a kind of regress pops up there, right? So I need to believe that, I need to believe in the justification I have for the belief, and I need to believe that justification is 100% infallible, okay? But now I need to believe that belief in the infallibility is also 100% infallible. And so you see, that's where the regress arises, right? And every one of the beliefs in that regress has to be 100% infallible, okay? Otherwise, if there were, if at the third level, I was only 99% sure, right? That uncertainty would trickle down. If I was a little bit uncertain about being certain, well, then that certainty would actually not be 100% certainty, and we would trickle down all the way to the belief, and you see that, well, there'd be a belief that I'm not actually 100% sure of the belief, the belief we started talking about. So this regress problem, I don't want to push it too hard because I think there's ways out of it. There's fairly reasonable ways out of it, and it's something that plagues kind of knowledge in general, not just certain knowledge, right? The idea of knowing that you know that you know that you know. Do you need to have an infinite number of beliefs in order to actually know any one thing? That I'm not going to push that too hard because, again, I think that there's ways out of that problem. However, there is an actual issue here that I do want to push, and it is. So let me give an example. So I'm holding a pen, and I have a belief that this pen is white and purple. So let's say that I claim that I'm certain, 100% certain, that this pen is white and purple. Okay, so what would be my justification for this belief? Well, probably it would be something like the reliability of my perceptual, my sense data, right? So looks white and purple. My sense data is reliable, so I have no reason to doubt it. It's white and purple. I'm 100% sure of it. So the idea would go. Okay. Now you also presumably believe that your belief that you're 100% certain about this is not only correct, but actually 100% certain, right? Otherwise the uncertainty would trickle down. So what's the justification for the belief that your belief in the original proposition was infallible? Well, there's got to be something else now, right? The answer can't again just be the reliability of my sense data. Because now there's something extra at play. Now you would need to say something about why I can't actually be in error about the infallibility of the sense data. Okay, so this is no longer actually about the reliability of the sense data. Now this is about my ability to identify whether my sense data is reliable or not. So now this is a different matter. Okay, so now I need to have a justification for that. And so the question is, whatever reason we had for feeling that our sense data, that we could be 100% sure that our sense data was reliable, that justification is not the same as the one we're going to have for believing that we can identify the fact that our sense data is 100% reliable. Something else has got to be at play there. And so what makes us think that we can be 100% certain about that other thing? It's kind of a different thing, right? So now you need to have two sort of different arguments, both of which you need to have 100% certainty about. And again, we can iterate this. Now, I'm not going to put the burden on saying we can iterate this infinitely. Maybe we can stop this somewhere. Maybe after a certain point that there's no longer distinctions or whatever, right? But at least at the second or third level, we can actually consider these positions, and they do seem to matter, and we can actually see that something different is involved in justifying each level. Okay, so now there's this much stronger burden. Not only do you need to have your justification for being certain in the belief, but a differently motivated justification for the higher level belief in the belief. So this would seem to be a fairly serious problem for the claim that we were certain in the first thing in the first place. So that's the first general argument. Now another general argument, which is very, it's actually very general and very broad, and again, I don't think it can be pushed too far, but I think it is quite important, and it's a kind of historical / inductive argument, which is that if we look throughout history, we find example time and time again of people who think and say that they are 100% sure of something, and then it turns out that they're wrong, right? And so I think that from that we should take a certain just humility, right? That the history of people being wrong about things they thought they were certain about should be enough for us to say, okay, it's always the case that we could be wrong, however unlikely it might be. One example I love to think about when it comes to this is the band Chicago, which is when it comes to at least their early stuff from the early 70s, I'm a big fan of. The original lead guitarist and one of the lead singers, Terry Kath. So Terry Kath died in 1978, and his last words, I haven't written down, his last words were, "Don't worry about it. Look, the clip is not even in it." Right? So this guy put a gun to his head and was so sure that the thing wasn't loaded that he pulled the trigger. He died. Kind of a morbid example, but I think just it's a good one. You know, when you put a gun to your head and you pull the trigger, you're pretty damn sure, right? You can always be wrong, right? You can always be wrong. So that's a general kind of attitude that I think history tells us we should probably have. Okay, moving on. And again, granted, that's absolutely not a knockdown argument, but again, it's a kind of a cumulative position that I'm putting forth here. Okay, the next argument, the next kind of general argument, is from the Agrippan trilemma, otherwise known as the Munchausen trilemma. So the Agrippan trilemma is usually put forth as an argument for skepticism. Okay, now I'm not using it to argue for skepticism, but it's relevant here. So the Agrippan trilemma goes as follows. Knowledge requires justification. Justification is usually going to be in the form of a belief. Okay, so let's say I believe X. Why are you justified in believing X? Well, because Y. Why are you justified in believing Y? Because Z. And so you see that you can get a justification regress problem, right? If the idea is you need justification for any given belief, then whatever that justification is, in order to say that you know it, you're going to need justification for it. And so, on it goes. It's justification all the way down. So this is just a very, very fundamental problem in epistemology. There's traditionally three ways out of this, or three ways you could go with this, and that's why it's called the trilemma. You can bite the bullet on the regress and just say, sure, it's just an infinite regress of justification. That seems pretty counterintuitive. It seems pretty difficult to accept the idea that actually is justification. If it doesn't bottom out at anything, then it seems like the justification doesn't actually carry you through back up to whatever the original thing you were trying to claim knowledge of was. You can have a circular approach, and so you can say, well, X justifies Y, Y justifies Z, Z justifies X. Okay, so now you have a loop of justification. Again, people have argued for it, but it seems counterintuitive, right? It seems like if you're in a loop of justification, there's sort of nothing carrying that loop up. There is nothing from which the justification sort of arises. The idea is, intuitively, it feels like you need a foundation of justification. And so that's the most common way out of the Agrippan trilemma, is what's usually called foundationalism, which is the idea that there is some bottom level belief that can ground all the others. Now, the issue is that bottom level belief, whatever it is, the Agrippan trilemma asks, well, what justifies that? And it can't just be another belief, because then it's not the grounding, right? So that bottom level belief, it needs to either not require justification, be some special belief that just doesn't need justification, or it needs to in some way be self-justified, so that the justification somehow comes with it. Those are tough criteria to meet, but otherwise, if you don't meet one of them, you get skepticism. So most people have tended to find a way of saying that there are beliefs that either don't require justification or are self-justifying. One way of doing this is by going the no justification route and going by a route that is called naturalized epistemology. So naturalized epistemology is a project that I think was coined by Quine, and it's actually something that I spoke about with Professor Jim Slagle in my interview with him. I'll put a link to that as well. But so we talked quite a bit about naturalized epistemology when we talked about Alvin Plantinga. But the idea with naturalized epistemology is forget the whole, justification regress thing. Stop looking at this so sort of philosophically, and instead study knowledge from more of a scientific perspective, right? Let's use the scientific method to look at what counts as knowledge, and not this, speculative problem of justification, which, has been around for thousands of years and we've never made progress on it. And so part of the idea there, and the way that Plantinga takes it, is there are beliefs which you can just believe and you don't need to justify them. There is no need for justification of them. If they are called into doubt, if something actually genuinely calls them into doubt, then you may have to question them, but there's no need to justify them. Now, the very fact that he says, it is always possible that they're called into doubt, and then if they're called into doubt, you may have to question them, means that his view is a fallibilist one. Okay, and Plantinga admits this. His view is a fallibilist one. So that's not gonna help the person arguing for certainty, right? So Plantinga is the kind of person who says, yeah, I do have knowledge, but no, it's not certain. It's always possible that for any given properly basic belief, these are the beliefs that he says don't need justification. For any of them, he says, yeah, it's possible that something could call them into doubt, and if that happens, then I can look for justification. Until then, there's no reason to look for them. So that's, again, one route, but it's not going to help certainty. Generally, the naturalized epistemology approach is not really going to help certainty, because it takes, so the way that Quine did it, it takes this scientific approach using the scientific method, and the scientific method is inherently fallibilist, right? The scientific method is based on inductive reasoning, and the problem of induction, that is the problem that just because we find more and more and more and more evidence for something, it's always possible that still, that evidence will not continue to appear, right? That's a problem that has never been solved with any level of certainty, right? So Hume's problem of induction here, right? Just because you see the sun rise every day and you form the belief that it'll continue to do so, but you haven't actually proven 100% that it never will. Actually, presumably one day it won't, right? So when you have inductive evidence, right? So repeat evidence for something, that gives you justification to have strong belief in it as a rule or a law or something. But by the nature of inductive evidence, you are not justified in being certain of it. So given that the scientific method is always working with inductive methods, this again doesn't help the certainty argument. So the other way out of the Agrippan trilemma is to say that there are self-justifying beliefs. Maybe that you could say that that's just a different way of saying that beliefs don't need justification, but whatever. Semantics aside, there's this other class, which is that there are beliefs that kind of in them already you can see they're sort of self-evident, and so for that reason you can say either they justify themselves or they don't require justification, whichever you prefer. As far as I know, all of those claims that people say are self-justifying or self-evident come in two classes. One class is the beliefs from experience. So the idea is I can be certain of what my, of what I'm experiencing or perceiving. That's one. And then the other is logical truths, tautologies, laws of logic, things like that. So, 2 + 2 = 4. All bachelors are unmarried men. The law of identity, A is always A. These are the sort of, that's the second class. Now, both of them seem potentially plausible at first. I'm going to make the claim that both of them for any kind of argument in either class, you'll see that at the very least we're not justified in saying we're 100% certain. Let me deal with the experience arguments first. So here's the kind of starting point of this. I'll get the white and purple pen again. Here's the claim. I am looking at a white and purple pen. Why doubt this? It seems I see it. What is there to not be certain of? The response is, kind of the traditional response is, well, maybe you're in a dream, maybe you're hallucinating, maybe there's an evil demon controlling your thoughts and experiences, etc. Right? So this is the famous route taken by Descartes when he's considering whether he can be certain of anything. And so these are the reasons he himself gives for doubting something simple like the white and purple pen in front of me. Now his own answer, which a lot of people find compelling, is the famous cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Right. So whatever illusions I may be under, right, I am obviously thinking, going through some kind of experience, therefore I must exist, even if I'm wrong about everything else. Now, Descartes' cogito, I think, is fairly clearly wrong. It goes too far, because let's say that, I'm going to call this into doubt later, but let's say that we actually can be certain that, well, at least I am experiencing this, whatever it is that I'm experiencing, no matter if it's an illusion or hallucination or a dream or whatever. However, what makes us think there's an I there, right? So sure, the experience is there, right? There, the qualia, as they say, of the whiteness and the purpleness of the shape in front of me, this pen-shaped impression that is in front of me. Okay, that's all. Let's say perfectly given. What is, what justifies this idea that there's this subject, this me, sort of, outside of all of these impressions, having them? There doesn't seem to be any real reason to bring that extra thing, right? This extra me having the experience. I think, if anything, just going from Descartes, he probably should have just said, not I exist, but experience is happening, let's say. That would seem, I think, more plausible. The me in there seems to kind of come out of nowhere. And David Hume has other really kind of good arguments to show that the notion that there's always this me is, it's problematic. It could be as much an illusion as anything else. So you could bite the bullet on that and say, okay, fine, I'm not certain that I exist either. Fine. But I'm certain about the experience, that experience is going on, right? The experience of a purple white pen is going on, whether or not there's a me or having that experience or not. And so here's where I think that can also be called into doubt pretty seriously. It's typically granted, that we can't be certain of the past, and we can't be certain of the future. Why we can't be certain of the future is obvious, right? We have no idea what actually is going to happen, so we can't be certain of it. The past, memories are unreliable, right? Our knowledge of the past is from memory, or let's say from historical account. Both of those are obviously definitely fallible. We know that from experience, from everyday experience, that they are fallible. Certainly, if we're considering the possibility that we're in a dream or hallucination or the Matrix or whatever, then we should certainly be taking into account the fact that our memories could be wrong, right? So this idea of being certain that experience is going on is only going to apply to the present experience. Okay, so we can't actually be sure that there ever was past experience. We can't be sure that there is ever going to be future experience, but you would, if you're going to go for this certainty claim on experiences going on, you're going to have to narrow it to say present, immediate experiences going on. That brings in the problem of what the present is. And that's a pretty serious problem. Okay, so there's two views you might take on what the present is. They correspond to two different views that you might have of time. You might think that time is continuous, or you might think that time is discrete. So if time is continuous, then it's infinitely indivisible. It's infinitely divisible. That's what I meant. And if it's discrete, then there's some smallest time unit that, time just comes in these little tiny chunks, and you can't divide shorter than that. Now, let's say that time is continuous. Well, if that's so, then the present as such doesn't really exist as anything at all substantial. It's literally infinitesimally small. Okay, so it doesn't actually have content, so to speak. It's more like, so if you think of a point, let's think geometrically here. You draw a line, right? And what's a point? A geometric point. Well, a geometric point doesn't take up any space. It's just a coordinate that divides the line into two parts, right? If the point is on the line. Similarly, with an instant in time. So an instant in time doesn't actually contain any time in it, right? But rather, it's just a kind of coordinate that blocks off the past and the present. The past and the future. So that's all that the present is. It doesn't actually have any content. If the view is that we have a continuous view of time, which I'll say it certainly seems to me like the most intuitive view. Of course, there are lots of problems with thinking that time is continuous, that thinking that time is discrete solves. Zeno's paradoxes among them. But I don't want to get too much into that here. It is possible to respond to what I just said by denying part of it and saying, even if the present is instantaneous, even if the present is a point in time, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have anything. It just means that it's static. And so you might say, no, there is a state of affairs at a given time. It's just not, there's no change in it at all. It's 100% static. However, you can't freeze times, conceptually at a point and have content. It's just static content. And I think that's a fair response. However, if that is what's going on, that we have this knowledge of an instantaneous, of a static, instantaneous present. Here is the problem. Our perception and our understanding of what we're perceiving are two different processes, right? So we perceive raw sense data and then we make sense of that raw sense data. The process of understanding that raw sense data, making sense of it, right? Understanding it as something other than just this raw sense data. That's a process, which means it's a process that takes time. Okay, which means that if you're getting raw sense data of a point in an instant in time, by the time you've made sense of it, that instant is in the past. It's a memory, and we're back in a fallible situation. In fact, even if time is discrete, Okay, even so now let's forget time is continuous. Let's go to the time is discrete possibility. Even if time is discrete, whatever the elementary unit of time is, it's going to be incredibly tiny. Which means that the amount of time that it's going to take us to understand the sense data we're receiving is going to be longer than that. So even in that case, by the time we've understood, we've made sense of the sense data we're receiving, we've made sense of it enough to be able to say something about it, like, look, there's a white and purple pen in front of me. By the time we're able to have that idea, it's in the past. And so we can no longer be 100% certain of it. There is, again, a response to that. And that response goes something like this. The perception is the understanding. No, it's not true that you need this extra process of understanding the sense data. Once you receive the sense data, bam, you're sure of it. You don't need this extra step. But I think that's very clearly a mistake. If you want to say that there is nothing more to knowing the content of your sense data than just the sense data itself, then you've actually reduced knowledge to simple perceptual experience. Okay, that's problematic, if for no other reason than it doesn't seem to really leave room for knowledge of abstract matters. Or you would have to say that knowledge of abstract matters is a completely different kind of thing than knowledge of perception, which actually you're basically saying is just perception. And again, I mean, I think that it's fairly obvious that knowledge is not perception, that they're very distinct things. And so I think it's very difficult to run this, to convincingly run this line and say that you're certain of it. Much more intuitive is to say that knowledge is a propositional attitude. That is to say, it's an attitude that we have about propositions, right? About claims. And again, from raw sense data, qualia, colors, sounds, right? To a claim, there is a pen, it is white and purple, right? You need a translation, so to speak. And again, that is definitely going to take time. Now, there's more to be said about that, actually, because it's not only that you're going to need time. In order to make that translation, you're going to need the ability to translate something into a proposition, which means you're going to need the faculties to create propositions, and to have knowledge of them. And so you're going to need, first of all, basic logic, right? You're going to have to have basic logic, the ability to use basic logical connectives, and, or, if, then, all that good stuff, in order to really kind of like understand the grammar of how propositions are put together. And so in order, so even if we put aside the time critique for a moment, in order to be able to say that you're certain of your experience, you're going to have to say that the faculties you need to translate that experience into a proposition that you can have an attitude about, the attitude of knowledge. You're going to say that you're also 100% sure that those faculties are fully reliable. Okay, so in other words, your logical language is 100% reliable at translating actual experience into propositions. And then you're also going to need a language with concepts that you can use to describe the sense data, right? So not only do you need the logic of a language in order to just put together propositions abstractly, but then you're also going to need concepts. You're going to need, in order to talk about the one I've been talking about, you're going to need a concept of whiteness. You're going to need a concept of purpleness. You're going to need a concept of existence. There is. You're going to need a concept of pen. All of those you have to be. Now, you also have to be 100% certain that all of those concepts are reliable, that your ability to apply when those concepts are instantiated are 100% reliable, that there is nothing internally inconsistent or incoherent about that network of concepts that you have, right? all of that, in order to go with the experience angle, you're going to need to say that all of that is also something you're 100% certain of. Now, I'll come back to the issue of logic and of the conceptual categories, but just another point. Everything I just said makes the time critique even stronger, right? It's not just that you need to translate the experience you're getting into knowledge, right? That process involves applying this huge network of concepts that you have using some kind of logic, propositional grammar, and a process of evaluating, right? The idea that, that you could do that, forgetting any other concerns, it's obviously not going to be instantaneous. It's obviously going to take quite a bit longer than whatever the elementary unit of time is. And so it's always going to be about something already in the past. So I think if you take everything I've just said, put it together, maybe you have counter arguments, maybe you have objections, maybe you have a way out. I think that, I'd be curious to hear what those objections or ways out are. However, it seems fairly clear to me that even if there is a way out for all of these things, the issues here are complicated enough that we have to have a sliver of doubt about whether we can really be so-called 100% certain about the content of immediate experience. Now, I said I'd come back to logic. The issue of the issue of whether we can be certain about logic or about analytic statements, so-called, right? Like bachelors are this bachelor is an unmarried man, or that's a very different matter. I think it's actually a little tougher to show why there's always doubt about those. So since that's a whole different matter, I will be getting to that next week. And that concludes today's episode of Who Shapes the Barber? Again, I'm William Nava. You can check out other episodes, as well as my other philosophical and artistic work at williamnava.com. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, go to williamnava.podbean.com. Thank you so much for listening.